Hello and welcome to Beyond Security beSECURE demo. Today we're going to speak about our flagship product beSECURE, which is looking for vulnerabilities on your network and in many devices. beSECURE covers layers 2 to 7. You can find with it vulnerabilities on your coding language, on your servers, on your databases, you know, computers, telephones, firewalls, access points, basically whatever, as long as it has an IP. If there's an IP, if there are known vulnerabilities for that specific tool, then we are surely going to find them. Basically, also looks for third-party application vulnerabilities, for example, vulnerabilities in your Google Chrome or vulnerabilities in your Adobe Reader. We will start with lines of products and the method in which we are working as a company. So as a company, we try to follow the software development lifecycle, meaning that our first tool is meant to the step in which you actually write your application. When you will be writing your application, you would need to use a tool such as beSource. beSource is a static analysis tool. With beSource, I can perform code testing for security and quality. So it has two modules basically. And beSource will later generate a report showing me all the violations that I have. For example, with beSource, I'm going to scan a Java source files, and I will compare it to the latest OWASP standard. So beSource will give me all the points in which I've actually break down the standard. So all the points in which I've actually violated the rules in the OWASP standard. Now, beSource comes in two methods of deployment. One of them is the developer edition. The developer edition is a standalone product. It's meant more for MSPs or for small teams. So in the developer edition, you would be receiving the source code from either Git or locally or from FTP server and so on, or as an MSP, you will receive the source code from your customer and you will run a scan on it on your local PC. Then later you will generate it, beSource will generate a report. This report will be distributed by you to your developers if you are in a small company, or to your customer if you are an MSP. The good thing about the beSource developer tool, the standalone tool, that it's really lightweight. You can easily scan it, thousands of lines of codes. It's of course portable. You can take it wherever you want. And it doesn't require you a very complex installation. So it's a very, very simple installation. The scanning engine between the developer and the enterprise is quite similar. The enterprise has more features, and of course, it's meant for a bigger team. So the enterprise edition has few perks that the developer edition doesn't have. For example, the enterprise edition has an API connection. You can actually take the results from beSource, put them into your Azure DevOps, for example, using API. You can take them, put them into other tools as you see fit. Furthermore, the Enterprise Edition comes with a set of rule access management. So you would have admin consoles and you would have client view, so for the developers themselves. And so as an admin, I can configure a project. I can connect it to Jenkins. I can connect it to Git. And what I will be doing is assigning my developers to that specific project. Now, my developers will be able to view the source code with the violation whenever it's been scanned. With the enterprise, unlike the developer edition, I can perform scheduled scans. So I know that every day my developers will push their source code into Git every day at 5 p.m. So I will run the scan at 6 p.m. So the morning after, when my developers come to office, they will see all the violations and they will start on working them, starting on fixing them. Now, another nice thing about beSource is that it doesn't require you to compile your application at all. So you can take raw source files and just scan them, see where you are. You don't need to create a version. You don't need to generate anything. You just take the source code that was written, and there you go. You scan it, get the results. beSource integrates into FTP server, SVNs, CVS, Git, and also to Jenkins, Eclipse, and so on. So it will be really useful to you in your development lifecycle. It supports coverage of 15 languages, the most common one like C++, Python, Java, .NET, and so on. Now, after developing software, or developed, some tool of my own, and I'm about to release it to the customers. Now, the phase I'm in is the verification step. In the verification step, we have a tool called beStorm that will come and it will be helpful. beStorm performs dust. And no, it's not dust as you may think, because the industry think about dust as the dynamic testing for SQL injection and for a cross-site scripting or CGI queries. That portion is actually covered in our tool called beSECURE, the one we're going to focus on today, and it's covered in the web application module. In beStorm, we will do dust in a very different manner. We will be performing a black box testing, meaning that we don't know anything about the DUT. We only know the IP that this DUT uses, or if it's a Bluetooth, the MAC address that it's used, the Bluetooth MAC, and we do know the port that is open. So what we will do, we will run a analysis scan. We will understand which modules are relevant. So beStorm will actually suggest the relevant modules. Then with those relevant modules, we will use to perform the fuzzing. Let's say that I have a Modbus, my device using Modbus protocol. So port 502 is open. I will put the IP in beStorm. beStorm will run a scan, find that Modbus is the relevant protocol, and then I will start a fuzzing project. Now, when speaking about fuzzing, we need to first understand what fuzzing really is. Fuzzing is a method. This method is meant to perform testing that are behavioral testing that check for vulnerabilities in the protocol, in the way the software was actually written, and in this way the software is actually communicating. Fuzzing is done by injecting malform inputs into the DUT. Let's say that the DUT is supposed to receive a packet with the number 1 as an integer. What happens if you're going to put 1,000? What happens if you're going to put 100,000, and so on? beStorm is meant for IoT, critical infrastructure, automotive. So automotive companies use beStorm to test their sensors, their their engine, the way the engine communicates, and so on. They will be using a protocol called CAN bus or OBD2. beStorm is a certified tool for EDSA, for lab testing. And it also has some modules called like AutoLearn, in which beStorm will actually learn your API and create a unique protocol for your specific API testing. And it also has the ability to do AutoLearn from files or from network, network files and so on. So beStorm it doesn't have a limitation on the amount of protocols and modules you can test. You can go ahead with 260 default modules, but you can definitely increase and start using other modules that you have built. For example, if I customize a module and I want beStorm to test for my customized module, then I will use the beStorm AutoLearn to perform that, to do that. Now, the nice thing about beStorm is that whenever we find a vulnerability, we will export the results in a Python script. So you can retest it as much as you want. You can monitor the DUT while we're testing, so you will understand which part of my protocol is problematic, why this violation occurred, what is the thing that I should be fixing. The goal in beStorm is actually crashing the DUT, allowing the attacker to perform a remote code execution. If we were malicious, of course we are not. Allowing the attack to perform a bypass to the login, so crash the login. And also, the important thing to know about beStorm is that it's really meant for your specific product. So it's really unlike, if you are Microsoft and you develop DNS, this DNS has been tested by millions of users every day. Millions of researchers, attackers, you name it, are constantly looking to find vulnerabilities on your DNS because you're Microsoft, because it's a well-distributed product. But what if I'm a small company and I've developed a product? I don't really know what vulnerabilities this product has. I try to test it with some, generic testing and looking for CVEs and so on, but I haven't really found anything because this product doesn't use a very common, very common methods, or it's not very well distributed. So there are not a lot of CVEs published for it and so on. Then in this case, beStorm will be the right right thing to choose, because beStorm will actually find you 0 days vulnerabilities. You'll find vulnerabilities that haven't been published, vulnerabilities that are unknown to the public, and so on. Now, once being done with the verification step, and I'm moving into production, so I've actually released my product to the public. In the production step, we will perform automated scanning and compliance check. Within our compliance check, you can see standards such as OWASP, PCI, in which we are an approved scanning vendor, so we are authorized to provide you certified PCI reports, and data compliance such as GDPR, CCPA, healthcare compliance such as HIPAA. If I'm in the healthcare industry, I would need to follow the HIPAA standard, SOX, and of course SOC 2, ISO, and so on. Now with beSECURE, what it's meant for production environment. Therefore, it's a very, very safe testing tool. The scanning that we are done will never crash your DUT, will never crash your network, will never even have any impact on your network itself. We are doing a very, very safe testing, and therefore we are also meant for OT environment and for IT environment. It is used mostly by MSPs, SOC, or security managers in small to big companies. But the thing about beSECURE that make it so easily, distributed between, like, for example, for an MSP or for a security manager in a big company, is that beSECURE contains a multi-tenant platform, meaning that I can create as many sub-organizations as I wish. I can add as many scanners as I need, according to my license with Beyond Security. But in general, it's very scalable. So if my team grow, if my company exploded, and now we have 1,000 employees that I need to scan, easily I can add in another scanner. I can increase the amount of IPs. It's very scalable. It's very good for distributed companies. Now, when we look at beSECURE, of course, you would see some major advantages, some perks, is that we are performing web application testing and infrastructure testing at the same time. So once I create a scan, it will create a web application and a regular scan. And then the report is a consolidation of both. So the report will include my web application results and my scan results. Another perk would be the low amount of false positives that we currently have, and that is due to the behavioral analysis. Behavioral analysis is the method that we use for testing. So for example, if I'm testing an Apache 2 server, I won't be performing a banner check, meaning that I won't only be looking for the banner, see that this version is old or new and so on. I will also be performing some queries to that DUT. I will be also performing some GET requests, and I will see how the DUT behave. I would see how the DUT responds. It might be that the banner is old, but the DUT actually behave as a newer version than what it currently is. It might be that there is backporting involved. Therefore, behavioral analysis become really helpful. Also, for making the scan fast, the behavioral analysis will pick and choose what relevant tests, what are the relevant tests, and for performing accurate testing with very low amount of false positives. beSECURE also has some cool features about asset management and about creating different types of reports and so on. So when we worked on beSECURE, we thought that this tool should be a very central tool within your security stack, meaning that it should integrate to your other tools in the security stack. We currently offer 40 pre-scan integration and 40 post-scan integration. Within our integration, you can see several things. For example, we integrate with companies such as CyberArk, Tycodic, ManageEngine, in order to provide the login, the password, if you want to create authenticated scan. We also integrate with ticketing systems such as ServiceNow, Freshdesk, Zendesk, and Jira. And that's because we want you to work on the vulnerabilities. So we want you to have a very easy way of taking that vulnerability, opening it up as a ticket to your developers, to your security team, or to your IT team, and then they can work on resolving it, on the remediation. beSECURE also integrate with SIEM systems such as Curator and Splunk, and it's also integrate with network access control such as Portnox and checkpoint firewalls and so on. And the goal about those integrations, first we have pre and post scan. So the goals about the integration is to make this tool very, very central in your security stack, and to make sure that the very important information you got from beSECURE is shared into your other tools. So when I integrate to a firewall or to a network access control after the scan, so a post-scan integration, for example, Portnox, beSECURE will notify Portnox whenever my host has more than 5 high-risk vulnerabilities, for example. And then Portnox will automatically quarantine this host, will automatically contain it, move it to a different VLAN, making sure that the person using this specific IP will not be able to reach out to other computers in my network and will not be able to spread out, if spread out the weakness, I would call it, or this also is very risky. So if I can break into to my environment through that specific host, then I can perform lateral movement and move into other hosts. But once I contain it, once I quarantine that host, then when the attacker tries to break it down and he managed to break it down, you won't be able to perform that lateral movement into my network. Now, we also have pre-scan integrations, as I mentioned. So for example, we integrate with the major cloud providers, such as Azure, Google Cloud, and AWS. We will basically pick up all the IPs and all the host names of your machines in those cloud providers, and you will be able to automatically scan them. We also integrate, for example, with Tufin, where we integrate with the secure track. So we get all the information that Tufin currently has about your host, all the IPs that are in the Tufin secure track. So you will be automatically able to feed them into beSECURE. beSECURE, as I said earlier, as I mentioned earlier, also support several types of compliance reports. So for healthcare industry, for European companies, California companies, credit card, for example, if you want to take credit card on your website. So we are an approved scanning vendor, meaning that we can provide you with 4 certified reports every year. And what's nice about our tool is that you're not restricted to scan only 4 times. You can scan every week, you can scan every day, but then the outcome would be that you would have the 4 certified reports. Each and every vulnerability is tagged with a CVE, so you would know what is how the industry calls that vulnerability, what is the identification number of it. For example, if you want to communicate to your integrator, to your outsourced company that does the security for you, or even the company that put the printer at your premise, you can mention to them what CVEs that printer currently has, so they can go ahead and fix it, and they don't even need to focus on the report and see the reports coming from beSECURE. There are 2 methods of deployment for beSECURE. The first one would be an on-premise solution where you would have an information server at your company, at your local network. And that information server basically is the management engine of the tool, where you're gonna set up scans, set up users, view reports, download them, schedule them, and so on. You would have scanners at each and every VLAN or each and every block of your network. And also, it says here cloud scanner, but it's not necessarily a cloud scanner. You can also put another scanner in your DMZ and connect to the information server to scan your websites. So basically, beSECURE gives you the ability to scan locally and external facing systems. And the communication is cool because it's done on a very secure communication using triple DES to encrypt the data itself, and the TLS layer to encrypt the communication tunnel. The direction of communication is pretty much defined by the user, so you can decide whether the local scanner initiates the connections or the information server would. A little bit more about local scanner. Basically, the local scanner is the scanning engine. So the local scanner will perform the scan, it will find the vulnerabilities and will send them into the information server encrypted as entries, and then the information decrypt them and translate them into names that the user can actually read. Another method of deployment is the distributed network. The distributed network is using a cloud. So you would have in the information server hosted by us in AWS, you would have a cloud scanner. The cloud scanner will scan your external facing systems. And now each site over here, it's basically a virtual container, meaning that each site could be I can call it an organization and say, that's my branch in Paris, that's my branch site B in New York, and site C is my branch in Philly. And so in each and every office of mine, I would put a local scanner, open up a communication to the information server. I don't need to open a rule in the firewall, only rule out. And so the scanning done here, for example, on site A, I'm scanning my computers and servers. It will be decrypted over in the information server where I log in and where I can see my actual results. beSECURE as a risk management mapping and scoring, meaning that we have a summary in which you can see your vulnerabilities and you can see the organization overview. So for example, you can see NTTC HQ demo, that's the headquarters of my organization. Then you would have the accounting department and you have the development department. Under each organization, I would see scans. So those computer signs that signifies a scan. You can see here the amount of hosts that I've scanned. So basically it's the same amount, 551. And you can see the scan dates when the scan ran. And you can see the total amount of vulnerabilities. Now, the number on the left always represents the current cycle, and the number on the right represents the previous cycle. If I run a scan every week, I would see a compare, a weekly compare between week and my current week and the previous week all the time. And next to it, you would see the amount of high-risk vulnerabilities. As you can understand from here, I've increased the amount of high-risk vulnerabilities that I currently have from 87 to 328, meaning that I haven't done my remediation pretty well. I saw also an increase in the amount of medium-risk vulnerabilities, and due to that, my score went down. So my score used to be 90, now it's 81. You can see the trend showing how many of points I've lost, and now you would be seeing what should I do in order to start remediation? In order to start remediation, I will pick the place which has the lowest score, where the system have the highest risk. So for example, that's the web portal scan. That's where I'm gonna start. That's where I'm gonna start my remediation in order to improve my security posture as fast as possible. Now you can stop the recording and read through the beSECURE key points and advantages. And thank you for looking at the slides. Now we're going to move into the actual live demo. So what you see over here, those are the dashboards. Basically, when you look at beSECURE the first time, you would see a blank screen and you would have to add your own dashboards. If I'm clicking on the plus button over here, you would see my organization. So my organization name is MSSP org, and I'm an MSSP company. And so I have several customers. I have my customer A, customer B, C, D, and E. My customer E went ahead and opened up 2 different offices, one in Glendale and one in Sacramento. So as a customer, as a user, he may log into the tool and open up the organization himself and perform the scanning himself as well. As you can see here, those dashboards that I've created earlier, those are classified in 3 manners. So I can categorize it by organization. I want to see data about a specific organization. I can categorize it by a scan. So I want to see, for example, the score trend for a specific scan. I want to see the risk distribution for a specific scan and so on. So I would have to pick an organization and a scan. And I can categorize it by asset group. So I have several asset groups that I've created, and that's a good way for me to understand, what are my critical assets, what are my, and all of my Windows endpoints, all of my Linux endpoints, to aggregate them into one group. Assets are really useful in the tool because not only that I can create a dashboard for them, I can also create reports for specific asset groups. So when we look into organization, let's say we want to understand the risk distribution in one of my specific customers, for example, customer C. I'm going to go ahead and click on add. Now this chart will be added below, as you can see over here. That's the risk distribution for customer C. All of those dashboards are actually dynamic, meaning that I can click on any of the points over here and get a list. For example, if I'm looking for the vulnerabilities from October 2019, I can click on it and get a full list of that. Some of the dashboards that I like to use are the monthly trend, the bubble graph, which shows me the amount of vulnerabilities per services score and the amount of hosts that are affected. The most frequent vulnerability, showing me the vulnerability that occur the most on my network, the one I need to take care of as soon as possible. And so we also have the most vulnerable host, and we also have the risk distribution group. And I think one of the actually the best graph that we have is the quarterly trend, because this graph shows me an estimation on how many vulnerabilities I'm going to have in the next quarter. So based on the remediation that I've done, based on the results that I currently have, it will give me an estimation on how many vulnerabilities I'm going to have, what I'm going to deal with in the next quarter. Now below you can see scorecards. Those are actually not dynamic, and those created by the MSP. So the MSP will say, I want to understand in my customers, in their network, which customer I should deal the most with, like which customer has the most vulnerabilities. So for example, in this case, customer A has the most vulnerabilities, whereas customer D is followed by, and then B, E, and C. And I also can see my own organization, which is an aggregation of all the hosts that I currently, all the scans and all the organization that I currently have, that has an overall score of 70. So I can set up an SLA with my customer, or I can set up an SLA with my management if I'm in a big company, and say, I promise that the score on the servers, or I promise that the score on customer A organization will never be below 70. So that's a very good way for me to, to ensure that my customers or my management, they can trust me. I can give them their results. I can give them some overview on what's going on. Now, except for the scorecards, as I mentioned, everything else is actually dynamic. So for example, if I'm looking at the MSP org risk distribution, I want to see all the high risk vulnerabilities. So I clicked on the high risk you saw in the pie chart, and then I can see all of my vulnerabilities. I can basically sort them by customer name, and I can also retest each and every vulnerability. So I will click on show must retest, tag the specific vulnerability I wish to retest, click on must retest again. Now, if I click continue over here, that will open an ad hoc scan. It will means that the scan will target specifically the port in which the vulnerability has been found and the specific IP in which the vulnerability has been found. So I don't need to go ahead and test, my entire block again. I don't need to scan again for 250 IPs. All I need to do is test for port 445 on the endpoint finishing with .1, for example. Furthermore, the tool has an integrated ticketing system. So if I click must update over here, I can change the state of that vulnerability from open to ignore, for example. And so this vulnerability will not show up again on my report. I can also keep the status open, provide a priority, let's say that this one is important, assign an owner to it. So for example, customer A would be the owner for that specific ticket, and give him a due date to fix that. I could put in the comment, please fix this vulnerability as soon as possible, for example. And then customer A, or whoever that is, it doesn't have to be customer A, it could be anyone here, for example, David Test and so on. This person will be able to write back a comment saying, I tried to fix it, but it's actually a compatibility issue. It's actually not fixable because this computer has to be in XYZ environment, XYZ reasons, and so on. So you can go ahead and always click create. Now you got a glance to all tickets that I currently have on my network. So you would see a ticket open on a cross-site scripting vulnerability, on a PHP issue, on Firebird default credentials, and so on. When I'm looking, for example, at the cross-site scripting vulnerability, I would see in the vulnerability details the affected parameter that we found. We would see the impact, the solution, and the comments that was added to that ticket. So I can go back and click on the vulnerability name and see it in the vulnerability view. When I'm looking at the vulnerability view, I can do again a retest and check if the vulnerability is still there or not. Furthermore, if we look into the graph, they are exportable as PNG and CSV. I can expand, compress them. For web application testing, if we already looked at cross-site scripting, for web application testing, we do ad hoc testing that is immediate. So when we do a retest, it will give you an immediate response whether the vulnerability is there or not. So if I click continue over here, you would see that. You can see that in this case, the certificate verify failed. So it's not known if it's there or not. And then you would see if I tag another vulnerability over here, you would see probably a different results. So let's see. In this case, the vulnerability actually still exists. So I can assure that my developer told me that he fixed the vulnerability on demo.testfire hasn't really fixed it. Now, we do tell you if we were not able to test it. We would tell you if the DOT is down, and it's not that the vulnerability still exists. So we are being very, the tool is being very accurate about whether you fix the vulnerability, whether it's still there and we can reach it, or whether it's not there. And so, when the retest will show you that the vulnerability is not there anymore. Each and every list over here that we generated through the dashboards can be actually exported as an XLS, CSV, XML, PDF, and HTML. And now we're going to go back and we're going to create a new scan. So to create a new scan, this process is done pretty easily. I would have to pick the relevant scanner. For in this case, I'm going to scan with a cloud scanner. I'm going to give it a name, site 919, and then I'm going to put the range. So the range in this case would be demo.testfire.net. That's just a demo website. I can also put, IPs, and in the bulk, for example, I can put a subnet /24. It is important to put a comma between each and every entry. And so the system would ask me, where do you want the scan to go to? Which virtual container the scan belongs to? Which organization? Is it belongs to customer E, A, B, C, and so on? In this case, this scan belongs to the MSSP org. So it's in my headquarters. That's my main website, for example. The system digests IPs and FQDNs, of course. I would choose the scanner. Again, this time I chose a external scanner, but I definitely have also local scanner. For example, the Joel Lab LSS, that's an internal scanner right here at my lab. The system would ask me whether I want to perform dust on it, dust testing. So if I want to perform web scanning or not. And in this case, I've checked the box for web scanning as well. So at the end, the results will consolidate both web scan and regular scan. The system would ask me, who's the contact person? Who do you want to send the report to? So there is a difference between accounts and contacts, while as accounts, they have the ability to log into the tool, and whether they are reporting or scanning users, they will have the ability to view reports or create scans and view reports respectively. So as a scanning user, of course, I would have more permissions than a reporting user, which can also only view reports. Now I look into the contact, I can assign it to a specific person who will receive the report, but I can also assign it to a group, for example, my tech team. You would see that a contact where it has a G next to the name, that means a group, a distribution list that includes several emails. Over here, you can see the notifications, so I can disable them all, keep only the scan finishes, or what is most commonly used is the scan results change. So the scan will run each and every week, but only when there is a difference between between previous week scan and current week scan, I will be notified because there is a change to the results. You would see in the schedule, we can run a scan weekly, daily, or monthly, and we can pick and choose the specific date in which we want to run it. Then we're going to go ahead and click create. Now you see that the scan has been accepted by the scanner, so I will have to set it up. I can import a CSV with all IPs that I want to scan. So it's not offered in the quick scan, in the quick add over there where it says create new scan, but it is an option. It is one of the functions we offer. Then we have the authentication. So if I want to create an authenticated scan, meaning a scan that will go on the endpoint, create a dissolved agent, and check for issues on my registry, such as mismatches, bad configuration, third-party application vulnerabilities, and so on. For example, vulnerabilities in Google Chrome, Adobe Reader, and so on. I would be performing an authenticated scan. So I'm going to choose one of the authentication options. For example, the creds Joel. So the domain is Joel Test. The username is admin. And it should be an admin level in your organization that can do a read and write on the registry, of course. Now, another option for authentication is when I'm not scanning Windows devices, rather I'm scanning Linux devices. So I will remove the authentication. You can see that the password is not clear to me. I cannot see what is the actual password is, but the actual password is because I was only given permissions to use that password, but I don't really know what it is. And that's the nice thing about credential storage, which we're gonna cover later. Now over here for Linux, I can put in a star, like a wildcard, and I would see that it immediately pair into port 22. For example, for secure shell, of course, it's mostly done on port 22. You can see that I need to put the username and password. I can also use a certificate, for example, or I can also use elevated privileges such as super user do or super user. And then that while as in Windows, we will connect to the registry for do the testing. In Linux, we will look for example, for backporting or for specific vulnerabilities that require authentication to perform. Now, in this case, I'm gonna click on delete. We're going to move ahead in the hostname IP addresses. I can see all the IPs that I've included in the testing. For example, if I put a subnet, I put a class C 254 IPs, but there is a set of IPs that I don't really want to scan. I can put them here in exclude, so I can basically exclude them from the testing. You can see the tested pages, and I can also see the untested, so what haven't been scanned, and the web scans. So as you can see over here. Then we move into additional settings. As a company, by default, our mindset is that we want you, our customer or the user, we want you to focus more on remediating vulnerabilities. We don't want you to dwell too much into configuring our tool. Therefore, the way we build up the scanner is to perform a smart scanning, meaning that you don't have to choose a plugin. We run with a complete profile. The complete profile will pick and choose the relevant testing based on the technique of behavior analysis. So instead of you going ahead and picking up saying, I want to test for SQL servers, I want to test for websites, I want to test for specific coding languages, we will run a test in which the scanner will detect what services you have open, what ports you have open, and what systems. And then the scanner will perform the smart testing on it. So you have two profiles, basically. You have a complete one, and you do have the host information. The host information profile is more limited, meaning that it doesn't perform a vulnerability assessment. It just performs a test such as finding what is the OS, what is the ports that are, what are the ports that are open, whether you have a specific system running, and so on. So highly recommended is to use the vulnerability assessment. So as part of the discovering of what you got on your network, you would also be scanning for vulnerabilities on those hosts. Over here in the port range, I can actually exclude specific ports. Let's say in port 80, I don't want to scan it. Then I would click modify, and this port will not be scanned. Now I can remove that exclusion and clear out all the ports. And if I click modify again, it will be by default configured to scan port 1 to 1024. But yet it's not only 1 to 1024 that are being scanned, because if a smart scanner will detect a system, for example, SQL Server, it will understand that this SQL Server has a specific port open that is not within 1 to 1024. So we will also test for that specific port. We will also test for things that you haven't really declared in the port range, but they are there on the network. And of course, we never cause a crash. We never cause any issue on the DUT. We're not looking to, crash your network. We are looking to find vulnerabilities for you. So by default, it's highly recommended to leave it on port 1 to 1024. It is also recommended to ping the host before you scan them, so you would get only the relevant host scanned. Let's exit the other windows that I may have open. No, that's okay. So we move ahead now, and you can also have the ability to exclude specific tests. That's saying, I know that it's a smart scanner, I know that it won't cause anything, but I don't want to check for Apache, for example. It's something that I don't really want to test for. So I can go ahead and type the name of the vulnerability and then exclude it. I can also type a CVE, of course, and in order to exclude it. Or let's say that I want to go the other way around. I want to actually test only for specific things. So I can go ahead and type CVE and then add the CVEs that I actually wish to test. For example, SMB v3. So that's the only thing that I'm going to be testing. Although the scanning profile is set to complete, I will be only testing this specific CVE. Now we're going to go ahead into scan customization. So as part of the scanning, we also offer an extra service of compliance templates. So for CIS benchmarks, to see if your server, if your DUT is configured correctly according to the manufacturer benchmark, according to what's been, recommended for making it hard-ended. So you see here, we have Windows Server 2016, 2019, Red Hat 7, Solaris, Linux, and so on. And so you can choose to perform vulnerability assessment, but you can also choose to perform compliance testing. If you wish, you can configure the Nmap, prior to the scan, we perform Nmap. So you can configure it to, if your TCP is syncing on another port, and if you wish to have a shorter timeout to make the scan faster and so on. Furthermore, we have the device collector. The device collector is actually a really, really cool feature in our tool, because if you remember from the beginning of this demonstration, I was speaking about the integrations that we do pre-scan, before the scan. So for example, we will integrate with AWS. You would decide what is the specific region, and then you can actually connect to AWS. The scanner will connect to AWS and will bring back all the IPs relevant for the scan, all the IPs that you want to scan. So you see in the main, the hostname IP address range is actually grayed out, because the IPs will be determined by what machines you currently have, what instances you currently have in AWS. We have several integrations. For example, we integrate with ConnectWise, with Device42, with any RMM that you can think of, DNS, DHCP servers, management tools, just as Jamf, VPNs like PulseAway, Palo Alto, and so on, SolarWinds, Tufin again, VMware, and Zabbix, which is a monitoring tool, so meant to monitor my servers. And you can see over here that we also have the ability to perform from what we call the asset group scanning. So I've set up a list of assets group, okay? And for example, critical assets and the customer A port 993 open. And after setting that up in my machine, I can check if those asset groups have vulnerability. So I don't need to configure IPs. I will connect to beSECURE, will connect internally and find all the IPs that belong to those asset groups and start to scan them. When you start up with creating asset group, you would like to set up asset group, for example, for specific OS types. So for example, you want to scan a Windows OS or Linux OS, and then by using automations in the asset group feature, you would be able to automatically scan all your Windows or all your Linux OS types. Over here, you have permissions, so you can assign permissions to any of the users you wish. And we go ahead to reporting. In reporting, we have two formats, PDF and XML. And then we have the three types of reports. We have the complete report, filtered report. Filtered report will show you the risk level. So example, I want to see only high risk vulnerabilities. I want to see only vulnerabilities in which the CVSS score is higher than 7. I don't want to see all the vulnerabilities in my stack, for example. I want to see only vulnerabilities that fall under the category called firewalls. So all my firewalls vulnerabilities, I want to see them in one report. We also have a differential. A differential will compare my current scan with the previous scan. It will be showing me the persistent vulnerabilities, the new vulnerabilities, and remediated vulnerabilities. So I can check the box for what specific things I want to see. And we can go ahead and use a report from different styles. So we have the OSPF VS, the top 10s, HIPAA, GDPR, CCPA. We have a remediation work plan report, pen test report, and so on. Now we're going to go ahead into scheduling. So over here, we can set up our time zone based on the city where we are. For example, if we are currently in London, we can set it up. We can set it up to run weekly, daily, or monthly, as I mentioned, and we can also set up the active time for the scan. So we say the scan, I wish it to run between midnight to 8 a.m. out of office hours, and then I wish it to run again. If it hasn't run already between midnight to 8 a.m., I wish it to start again from 5 to midnight. So I have start time and I have an active time. So active time meaning I wish it to run between midnight to 8 a.m. and then I wish it to be active from 5 to midnight. I don't want it to be active in between. I don't want actual scanning in between because those are office hours. Of course, I can change the day, so it won't be a Sunday. And basically, I can change it to every week, every several weeks, and so on. I also have a daily scan, and the monthly scan will also give me the ability to perform like quarterly scanning. Then after I set up my scanning schedule, I can click and modify schedule. As you recall, the scan is related as also a web scan related to it. So in the other tab, I can put in a comment about this scan, what actually I'm scanning, and what is the goal for that scan. And so this comment will show up on my report. Then I also have the web scan, so I can click on it. In the web scan configuration, I can see the crawler that already started working. So what the crawler does is picking up the dynamic pages, finding on which pages there is content that we can test. There is content that is actually allowing user input, for example. So the user can put very well input, like, can put input that is a normal, such as his name and his email address, but that same user can put an input that is malicious, for example, a script. So those are the fields that we actually going to test. And then we have the authentication, so we can actually authenticate it into the web scan by doing basic authentication. So it's a pop-up NTLM, so it's based on Active Directory, Windows login, web login, in which we're going to examine the web page and find the actual forms for testing. Web test, JavaScript, and SSL certificate. Move ahead to the test so you can see the types of testing that we're doing. So cross-site scripting, SQL injection, credit card information. We check for all of those functions in the tool, and this name reflects actually a list of tests that run behind it. So we will do SQL injection by many means, not only by putting one query and saying, okay, it's not vulnerable, there's no SQL injection ability. We will also be checking for blind SQL injection. We will also be checking for different types of queries and so on. Furthermore, in the configuration, you can see the crawler, where we're going to put, let's say, if we want to start a different point of crawling, if it's not port 80 and port 443, so we can put it in here, the link. We can see the configuration where we're going to configure the crawler. Permission and reporting done very much similar, in a similar manner to the scan. And then in the scheduling, you can see that this scan is using the scan routine. So it will run whenever the web scan will run whenever the regular scan is running. Now we're gonna go ahead into a specific scan of mine. So I'm looking for one of my web scans, or one of my regular scans, in fact. I'm gonna click on View Report. I would see a report consolidating the regular scan and the web scan results. You can see on top here, you'd see Beyond Security logo, but you can put basically any logo you wish. And now if I scroll down, I would see the graph showing me the work I've done on remediation. The top tier remediation. So if I'm gonna apply the top tier remediation, that will solve 80% of my vulnerabilities. You would see external links, so I can download different types of reports from here. And then you can see the actual executive summary showing you all the amount of vulnerabilities you have, the vulnerabilities per host, and you can see that there's asset tag already deployed on several hosts of mine, because those hosts actually have high risk vulnerabilities, and that's the automation criteria I set up originally. The breakdown is shown by port, by category of vulnerabilities. So if I have malform packets, if I have mail servers issues, policy checks, firewalls, backdoors, and so on. So it's actually been categorized. See the vulnerability breakdown by risk, and then the actual vulnerability. So for example, here in the Apache vulnerability, we actually provide you with the proof. We will provide you with the CVSS ranking, so the CVSS score for that vulnerability, with the solution, what you should do to remediate this vulnerability, the CVE entry, and then the external links. So you can see it for each and every vulnerability that you find with our tool. For example, in an unsupported PHP version, we will show you the host that got affected and the amount of occurrences, of course. And later we will also be showing you the possible solution. For CGI query, again, the same concept with CVEs and so on. Now, the same type of report can be generated into like a OS Top 10 2013 report, for example. So basically, I can see now the breakdown for OS categories. You can see that broken authentication, that I failed that section, I failed the cross-site scripting section, and so on. And you can see for each section the description about that section and why did I fail. And then you would see the regular vulnerability view, and with each vulnerability coming with a basic solution and so on. Now we're going to move ahead to the credential storage. So the credential storage, I can set up credentials, assign them with integration, to save them in CyberArk, Manage Engine, and so on. And I can assign permissions to my colleague to use. In the admin section, we will do all what's related to user management and so on. This tool, as I said, is a multi-tenant. So as an MSP, I can actually log in as the user and see, let it create a login for the user. And so you can create these scans, see his results and so on, and I can still see those results. So now we're gonna log in as a different user. As you can see over here, we also added Google single sign-on. Now I'm logged in as John D from customer A group. So that's one of my companies. And now John D only sees his own organization, and he can set up any type of graph that he wishes. Now John also has the ability to upload the logo. So you can see here that John has the Tottenham logo enforced on his organization. And once we modify that, John will set up a scan now. We'll view a scan that he already created. For example, the QA sites. And now you can see that the logo has changed between the Unsecurity logo to the Tottenham Hotspur logo. And so as an MSP, I can do that change for my users, so they would only see my logo when they log into the tool, or I can let them change their own logo. And now when we look back, we can, after setting up the multi-tenant view, when we look back into the tool, we would look into the type of organizations that I can create, the type of users, and so on. The accounts page is listed into several sections. So I have contacts; those are folks that get report. Group contacts is an aggregation, several people that get a single report. For example, DevOps; those are 2 folks that get report. Account profiles; so that's the way to create users in the tool. I will set up a profile, and then the users will inherit their permissions from that specific profile. So they will be able to see specific organizations, they will be able to see specific users and so on. We move ahead to deployment. So over here I can see my scanner status, if my scanner is up and running or not, if it has the latest revision or not, and so on. I can check on my license, see how many IPs I've consumed, how many IPs are left. And as an MSP, I can take the license and break it into several sub-licenses. And so I can allow, I can have a view of all of my users. As an MSP, I can have a view of all of my users and how many IPs they have consumed. Then we look into the results, into the summary. We would see the graph shown basically in the presentation, but over here you can see that if I click on MSSP.org, I would have several type of functionalities that I can run on. So for example, I can compare the current scanning results with the previous scanning results. So you can see the amount of medium risk I've actually went down a little bit. And so you can see the complete report. So the ability to create a remediation plan, work plan. I have the top level report, which gives me some KPIs and organization information. I can generate pastime report, and I can send the report to any of my colleagues as a group or as individual user. I can also generate a vulnerability report. So if you look at the remediation work plan, this will suggest the top 30 remediations I should be taking. You can see it over here. So the top 30 remediations will actually solve 20% of my vulnerabilities. It's going to affect 142 hosts. And you can see that this list has, for each vulnerability, the amount of, for each type of vulnerability, the amount of vulnerabilities that currently occur on my network and the amount of assets that got affected. And then the list will show me based on the criticality level and the amount of occurrences. So first I'm going to see the PHP unsupported version. I would see the solution. Unlike the previous report I was showing that shows you the explanation and the impact and so on, this one is already dedicated to remediation. So it shows you just the remediation step you need to take. And then you can see all the occurrences. While we keep on going, I would see OpenSSL issue. So I need to upgrade my SSL version, and I would see all the assets that got affected. Now I see a cross-site scripting issue. So what I should be doing, what what is the remediation step, and then I would see all the IPs that got affected. We also going to generate a top-level report, as I said. So here, the organization top-level report will show me an aggregation of all the vulnerabilities that I have, how many medium and high-risk vulnerabilities, how many of my systems have high-risk vulnerabilities, and how many are immune to high-risk vulnerabilities. So let's say I have a total amount of hosts is 640. I have 166 immune, 473 vulnerable, and then you can see how many have high risk, how many don't, how many have medium risk, and how many don't. Then you can see the breakdown by operating system. So how many Linux and Windows systems do I have, and the amount of vulnerabilities and so on. A little bit of like information about the scan itself. So how long it took for each and every scan, the type of scans that I have. So those are the scans that I currently run, and the count of vulnerabilities for each and every scan. And then you'd see the metrics. So how many vulnerabilities do I have with a CVSS score that is equal to 6 or more? And then you can see the metric compare, in each and every time, So this is a really, really useful way for me to set up KPIs for my system management. Vulnerabilities also break down by type and by what is the most frequent vulnerability. So I know it already from the remediation report, but I can also see it from here. Some graphs, and that's about it. Now we're going to go ahead into the search. So the tool consists of an embedded search engine. So for example, if I search for all of my Windows devices, and I would see all the vulnerabilities appeared on my Windows device, on a Windows device, in fact. So it's kind of funny that you see Apache running on a Windows, but someone did a really terrible job in configuring an Apache into a Windows device, but that this thing happens sometimes. Then we have a differential report, so we can compare a specific scan from from different times. So I'm going to compare the scan from August to the scan from, let's say, back in July, and I wish to see the remediated vulnerabilities and the new vulnerabilities. So you can see over here, those are new vulnerabilities, of course. And if I had any remediated vulnerabilities, I would have seen them as well. Then you can see the hosts that I've scanned. If they are new or present, then I can also generate that into an HTML report. Move into reports where we can generate report, we can schedule reports. And as you can see, I scheduled some reports. So the use case here is really interesting because what if I get a regular report every week, but once in a month I need to get an organization top level report, or I need to get a differential report? For that use case, I would be using the scheduled reports. I will create a report, customize it. Say I'm customizing a top level or executive report, executive summary report, for example, and I'm going to give it a name. And I'm going to set up a password to protect it. And I'm going to click on modify. Now I'm going to schedule it and say, as you know, my scan normally gives me the regular report. That's the type of report I'm using. But now I'm going to schedule that every first day of the month, I'm going to get this executive summary report that I wanted. So I'm going to click on schedule, and that will be added to the list already showing up here. Now we move into assets. So in assets group, I can create specific types of automations. For example, over here, I was looking for all the Windows devices in the customer E group. I also have the ability to sort assets by CVSS score, sort assets by the amount of medium and high risk vulnerabilities, by the age of the vulnerability. So we actually set up, we actually look for when the vulnerability has been detected and how long it has been. So how long it has been when the vulnerability has not been remediated yet. We can basically sort asset by port, specific port that is open, by specific host name, and so on. And then this asset sorting that we have done will be helpful for us first in the dashboards that we showed earlier, and also over here. So I'm gonna set up the OT assets. We have basically two ways to view assets. OT assets will show me the operating system type, the net BIOS, the ability to set up a small note about the specific asset and so on. and the IT asset will show me the vulnerabilities across the board. So it's basically two reports showing up this basically the same data, but on a different manner. At the end, I will see the same vulnerabilities, but the focus here in OT is more on the open ports and the OS type. So I can set up in the Windows, let's say the Windows Server 2016 data center that I have, I can set up a log saying I've patched this vulnerability XYZ, I've did XYZ things on it, or where this source is, and so on. I can do a baseline comparing my current results with results from, let's say, previous quarter or anything else. And I can do a drill down, see all the open ports, and see the actual vulnerabilities per port. So this is a really random port, of course. It's not a standard port, and so I can see that I have an encryption issue on this port. I can drill down and see the actual vulnerabilities and CVEs over here. Now, if I'm looking at the same group, and I'm gonna look for the Windows asset group, of course, I can see that my actual vulnerabilities are different. So I don't need to, I can look into things from the port level, and I can look into things from the vulnerability level. And so from the vulnerability level, the focus will be on the highest risk vulnerability and then followed by the medium risk vulnerabilities. Our tests are updated regularly. So you can see last tests were updated in August 19. And you can see the server section where you have all the special integrations that we offer. And if we look into our demo report, so some standards report that we have a CIS report. The CIS report will be showing me whether I'm in the benchmark, in the the compliance benchmark for hard-ended servers. So you can see it's not looking for vulnerabilities, it's looking for tests, for checks. And you can see here, for example, the setting up the audit policy to no auditing, that is something that I've passed, but I failed allowing ICMP redirect over OSPF, for example. So you can see all the sections that I failed and passed. And then later on, you would see an explanation on how to set it up, how to remediate each and every compliance check here in CIS. The differential report that we were setting up earlier. So you can see here a compare of my current and previous scan. You can see the chart showing you how many persistent, new, and remediated vulnerabilities you currently have. Then a compare of the two scans, which hosts are new or present, how many vulnerabilities are new or remediated. And then it will start with the new vulnerabilities followed by the remediated vulnerabilities. The remediation work plan we already saw, the OS report as well. And now we're gonna see like an internal report showing you some of the nice highlight vulnerabilities we can find. For example, ability to find remote code execution, which will be show up here. So you can see the remote code execution on 2 IPs. Then we will provide a summary and we will provide a solution, of course. In this case, the solution is with Microsoft, so we'll just give you a link. Then you can see the actual CVEs by clicking on each and every CVE. You will be directed to NIST website. And then followed by other vulnerabilities we found on this scan. For example, the use of a null FTP password or the use of default credentials. So you can see it here. We can see the way we use to detect that vulnerability. Now we move ahead a little bit into, for example, the Epa report or PCI report. You would see that the report looks a little bit different because it's based on a different standard. So in Epa report, you would see whether you passed or failed Epa and what was the causing factor. So you can see it here. And so we're gonna move a little bit ahead to the PCI. So PCI is done in a different manner. For PCI, I will create it for you, the users. So me as Beyond Security will create it for the users. And the user, when he logs in, he has 2 buttons that he can click on. One is the play, which means that he will run an immediate scan, and one is the PDF in which you can view the report. This user specifically has several PCI scans. We can click on PDF. He will need to confirm that he hasn't done any changes to his network and so on. And now a certified PCI report will be downloaded, so the user can submit it to the auditor. You can see here, this report will show a breakdown, will show first the stamp on the approved scanning vendor, the scan status, and will show the ASVS station, so which host failed and why did they fail. We'll show the breakdown of vulnerabilities that caused this PCI scan to fail. Thank you very much for joining and listening to this demo. If you have any questions, please notify us at support@beyoncesecurity.com.